The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects our most basic rights to free expression. I'm Lee Zurich.
And I'm Tisha Powell. In just 45 words, it guarantees Americans have 5 key protections: the freedom to practice religion, freedom of speech, a free press, freedom to assemble, in other words, peacefully protest, and finally, freedom to petition, which gives Americans the right to criticize and even sue the government.
Those rights are at the center of a legal fight taking place in an Atlanta suburb after leaders briefly criminalized where free speech can happen.
In April of 2025, Sandy Springs City Council members approved 3 ordinances, one of which prohibits protesters from blocking driveways during demonstrations. The most hotly debated one restricted free speech within 8 feet of someone with opposing views.
This feels like an overreach for me.
The council's been put in a very uncomfortable position here.
If you don't help us out, chaos will ensue. You've got to help us out.
At the time, the chief of police said the ordinance would allow officers to keep the peace during demonstrations over the Israel-Palestine conflict. He pointed to a 2023 incident where 2 people wearing Palestinian flags walked through a pro-Israel rally. Sandy Springs is home to one of the largest Jewish communities in the metro Atlanta area.
It was an Israeli event, and we had 2 individuals that had the Arab headdress on with 2 Palestinian flags that walked into the crowd. They weren't saying anything to them. They weren't approaching them, but they were just walking through that event. The feeling of the community out there was outrage, and my guys had to grab them pretty quick and get them out there. This ordinance will help us do that.
So you would arrest someone just for walking through a group of people?
Yes. If they were walking with a Nazi flag, with this ordinance, we'd arrest them. Palestinian flag, we would arrest them.
Less than 50 days later, and after pushback from the American Civil Liberties Union, Sandy Springs City Council unanimously voted to repeal the ordinance.
However, the city still finds itself in a battle over free speech with a local newspaper.
Investigative reporter Brendan Keefe joins us now to explain why and how the city's restriction stems from an effort to stop anti-Semitism in the community.
Lee and Tisha, during that April meeting where Sandy Springs created the now repealed 8-foot buffer zone, it also approved an ordinance in place today. That prohibits the delivery of uncontracted for literature, such as pamphlets and paper ads, to homes between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. in Sandy Springs. City leaders say that's in response to neo-Nazi groups using the cover of night to distribute anti-Semitic flyers. However, that applies to everyone, including a free local newspaper, which was forced to change its operation as it's locked in a bitter lawsuit with Sandy Springs. In a sprawling Atlanta suburb, some free speech is limited to the time of day. Publicly speaking out against the measure, former TV reporter Mike Pachenik, even though his family received anti-Semitic flyers at their Sandy Springs home.
A neo-Nazi group littered my neighborhood's lawns, including my own, with hate-filled leaflets seeking to sow fear in the Jewish community.
Why not just charge somebody or write them a ticket for littering? Why paint with a broad brush and preclude legitimate media outlets from delivering their newspapers overnight?
The Sandy Springs Crier is now forced to deliver its free newspaper after 7 a.m. Any earlier would be a misdemeanor.
Limit solicitation and the delivery of uncontracted for literature into the residential neighborhoods between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m.
If App and Media puts something at the end of someone's driveway at 6:50 a.m. and someone calls and reports it, then what happens?
The police will come and handle whatever needs to be handled.
Hearing the city attorney say that if someone were to deliver the Sandy Springs Crier, then the police would show up and handle it.
Carl Appen publishes the Sandy Springs Crier. The newspaper was already suing the city for withholding public information from police incident reports. What is in these incident reports that they're not giving you?
Literally almost every single thing that actually is taking place.
Do most cities give you these records?
Every single city gives us these records with the exception of Sandy Springs.
Sandy Springs won a dismissal of the case in Superior Court, but Appen Media appealed to get the case reinstated.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
The item is approved.
They voted on this case a week and a half after the appellate court ruled in our favor.
This is now the law. in Sandy Springs. If Appen Media were to deliver their papers at 6 a.m., they're breaking that law.
And if the neo-Nazis now want to deliver their hateful content to my front yard at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, they can do it.
We reached out to Sandy Springs for comment, and attorney Dan Lee denied our requests. The lawsuit over police records is still ongoing.
Brendan, you've spoken with Appen Media extensively. What do they think motivated this change?
Lee, Appen Media acknowledged that there is a coincidence, at least of timing. A week and a half after Appen Media won its appeal against the city, council members passed an ordinance that directly impacts the paper's operation. Now, Carl Appen from Appen Media said these incidents of anti-Semitic flyers popping up are thankfully rare, but his newspaper is not rare. It's delivered every single Tuesday to every resident in Sandy Springs, with the exception of people who choose to opt out.
During that meeting, there was also talk about banning this kind of speech altogether.
Correct. The argument was that no matter whether it was a free newspaper or anti-Semitic literature, the paper piling up on doorsteps litters the city. However, when they looked at the case law, they found a different city in Georgia tried the same thing decades ago. In 1999, the Georgia Supreme Court ruled it was unconstitutional for the city of Sylvania to ban the distribution of free printed material to homes, citing violations of freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
And finally, Brendan, how does this ordinance change operations for the Sandy Springs Crier?
Publisher and CEO Hans Appen tells me they're managing the situation as best as they can. However, he says those new hours do impact their delivery drivers and their ability to work other jobs, particularly during the day. He says the new hours also make it more difficult to retain and recruit new delivery staff. Appen does mention so far there haven't been any accidents as a result of delivering newspapers during the day when the traffic is heavier.
This isn't the first time the government has stepped in to regulate laws surrounding protest. Since 2017, state and federal lawmakers have enacted 55 bills the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law says restrict the right to peacefully assemble. For example, at least 4 states have laws that limit liability for drivers who hit protesters with their vehicles. And at least 11 states increased fines and created new penalties for protesters who interfere with traffic.